Don't whisper to me words that you don't mean.
Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with New York City jazz pianist, composer, and arranger John Di Martino. We caught up with him in early May 2020 to talk about the COVID-19 lockdown, projects he's been working on lately, his jazz history, and that hopeful future. Enjoy.
Even though things are quiet, it is still going to be a noisy street. I'll close this window.
That's cool. No worries, man.
Yeah, usually, when you least expect it, a siren starts going by.
That's okay. Hey, we're dealing with jazz, so it's all improv anyway.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. Well, hey, thanks for taking a minute out. How's everything going up there?
Good. They're talking about, of course, I live right across the Hudson, which is, in New Jersey, but literally 5-minute commute into Midtown, But it's nice being on this side of the Hudson because, there's a little more space, a little less congested. So, I take a long walk every day and I just social distance. But, technically I live in Union City. It's weird. Across the street is a town called Weehawken. And then I walk a few blocks and I'm in Hoboken, which is probably the most famous, city. But in Hoboken, you still see a ton of people with, not wearing masks, through this whole event. And I can't figure out why. It's like they're so nonchalant about the whole thing, It's weird.
Yeah, I think there's just a split with people. I think there's parts of people that just they just I don't know, they aren't into it, and that's just the way it is. They're going to do what they're going to do. I don't know if it's necessarily conspiracy kind of stuff, but I don't know. It's just weird. It's strange.
Well, the weird thing yesterday, I tend to make little social calls while I'm walking around, and I'm talking to a friend of mine, but then I see one of the local news stations. Actually, I think it was this woman, Jessica Moore. She's CBS affiliate. I see her interviewing somebody, and funny, I was so bugged about all the people without masks, and I wanted to say something, but they were interviewing somebody else, I think a local politician, and so I do my errands, and when I come back, I see her again, running into a deli, and I said, I don't really understand why so many people don't wear masks, and she says, we're going to do a special on that. She said, can I interview you? So I did an interview, which I'm kind of glad just to talk about it as a concerned citizen, and maybe that'll help a little bit.
Yeah.
So it was interesting that opportunity fell in my lap, but it's weird. It's happened. It happened another time. I'm walking through Hoboken, and I'm thinking, wow, so many people don't wear masks. I wish I could talk to the mayor. He's actually a Sikh. His name is Ravi Bala, and I swear to God, the very next block, who's walking right in my direction? It's Ravi Bala.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's weird. So I don't know. Hopefully, maybe some of this stuff will help. But
you're
in Kansas City. You guys are in lockdown?
Yeah, we're in a lockdown. It's kind of the same thing. I mean, we're not, obviously New York's been kind of the epicenter, but, we're on lockdown until the 15th. Statewide, they kind of ease some things till the 3rd, but our mayor, Quentin Lucas, is pretty astute with what he's doing, and there's this 10 on 10 on 10 thing where only 10 people can come in, 10% capacity, that kind of a thing as we phase everything in. So we're taking it seriously, and I know when we go out, we wear masks, and we're trying to stay safe. So yeah,
good.
But at any rate, I think it's good for us to talk about the music. That's why I reached out, and I thought, it's a good time. So what are you doing to keep your creative juices flowing during this quarantine?
Well, I have in my computer, I have a home studio, basically. I have a home MIDI studio. And a couple of years ago, I'll send you a link. I scored a series of travel documentaries. It was an Austrian production. It was called A Glimpse of Paradise. And basically they're travel docs, they're tours through beautiful gardens. This particular series all through the Islamic world, but beautiful exotic places, Iran, Jordan, Morocco, southern Spain, basically Andalusia. So it's funny, they recently made a feature-length version. I guess they took edits out of each 5. And I posted it on my Facebook, and I hadn't been working with my program for a while because I hadn't done a project like that. And because of the lockdown, I've really gotten back into it. And what I'm doing right now is working on a duo project with saxophonist Harry Allen. In fact, he suggested, he said, John, make me some lush tracks. So I'm making these sort of lush orchestral tracks. This particular project, I've been focusing on adaptations of like classical themes. And then Harry puts his beautiful tenor sax, he's in that Stan Getz tradition on top. And I'm really happy how it's coming out. And I'm going to be rolling this way with some singers too, because it's a way of adapting to the situation. The other thing I can do is whatever I do, I can send tracks to other musicians who have a home studio. Like there's a great woodwind doubler, a guy named Aaron Hike, who I've used on a lot of record dates. He's got a studio at home. In fact, he was part of this film score that I did, and I can send my tracks to him, and he can put his woodwinds on top. So there's a lot. Everybody's sort of developing their home studio. So I've been putting my focus into that.
Right on. Well, talk to me a little bit about the beginnings of how you got into jazz, where you were born and raised, and kind of how jazz became your life.
Oh, sure. I'm from Philadelphia, and I showed an interest in music early on. Like I think I was about 7 years old. For a little while, I messed around with studying drums. I think earlier than that, there's a time when I played a little accordion, but I sort of don't remember it. But it happened at some point as a little kid. I think I started to get. What leads up to now starts when I'm about 12 years old. I started studying violin, and at the same time, I started to fall in love with jazz. I had some relatives that were feeding me recordings, and part of my education, my mother, big jazz fan, and an amateur singer, and I had 2 older cousins that were really into jazz, and one used to let me sort of raid his record collection. And there's so much that I learned early on. Growing up, my brother was a theater person. He's about 9 years older, really into theater. So I grew up first listening to so many of the great American musicals, so that was like always in my head. Like one I remember so vividly is West Side Story. I still get a very strong emotional reaction whenever I hear the music to West Side Story, for example. And I basically I started playing professionally piano when I was 15 years old, and at the same time, I started to seriously study with a legendary teacher in Philadelphia, Jimmy Amadei. He became quite well known as an author with books about jazz harmony and jazz concept. And it sort of all begins from there,
So when you started out professionally, how did things begin for you? Was the stage kind of a natural second home? Were you nervous? What were your beginnings like?
Oh, I'm sure I was nervous. My beginning, I started, very humbly, playing with a wedding band. But around that same time, I had some friends that were turning me on to AfroCuban music. At that time, in the 70s, salsa. And so it wasn't that too much long after that I started to play with a salsa cover band and get into that scene in Philadelphia. And then maybe later on, a few years later, it was more like 19 years old, so when I really started playing jazz gigs around Philly. So both things I feel like became part of my DNA, and You know, ironically, a lot of the people that I listened to so intensely back then, Ray Barretto and Potato, later on I wound up working with them. You know, it's funny, I didn't, it was many years, there was a long period where I wasn't playing any Afro-Cuban music. And then when I moved to New York in '88, I started to get into the Afro-Cuban scene. In a weird way, I was playing at the Rainbow Room, and there was an American band and a Latin band, and somehow I started playing with the Latin band, and it was kind of a silly gig, you know, playing tangos and cha-chas, you know, for like Arthur Murray dancers, that kind of thing. But in the band were actually some amazing musicians from that scene, like Victor Venegas, who's one of the original members of Mongo Santa Maria's group, and great percussionist Virgilio Martí, who played with Potato. But somehow that contact, I started to play with Bobby Sanabria, and then from Bobby Sanabria with Potato, and then eventually with Ray Barretto, who I was with a long time, and I made quite a few records with, and they run the gamut. We made a record with James Moody, as well with Kenny Burrell, Joe Lovano. Was a great experience. So Afro-Cuban music became, I feel like, part of my structural DNA as much as jazz did. My first experience with improvisation really goes back to being 12 years old. I was really into blues. I used to play blues on the violin, and I used to play harmonica. And at that time, I was very into John Mayall, who was very popular. And John Mayall would put next to the title of each track on the CD, he would put the key, so you had an idea like what key you're in. And I remember like learning to play, just jamming along with his records. And I think also what gravitated me to him is that at 12 I was still playing violin, so I was interested in any records that had violin players. He used to hire a guy named Don Sugarcane Harris, a blues violin player, and so I gravitate toward anybody that hired violin players. So of course later on I stopped playing the violin.
What do you like best about being a musician?
You know, I've only ever been a musician, so I don't have an A and B. What do I like best about being a musician?
What was the first live jazz show you ever saw that made you think, man, that's what I want to do with my life?
Okay, that's interesting. I think it's very early on. I had to be, 7 years old or younger. I remember a television broadcast, and I'm not sure who it was. I think it may have been Keith Jarrett. And I remember just being in awe of the intensity of watching the players, like how deep they were inside the music. And I think I saw Keith Jarrett play the inside of the piano. And, just watching how intensely absorbed he was. And I remember my older brother, making some comment about that. But there was something in that I think was a little glimpse of the future for me, even though I had no understanding of what I was hearing, though I was fascinated by the sound. I remember it was a quartet setting, So I have a feeling that's the beginning.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you something a little bit different than what do you like the best about being a musician? Why do you love jazz? Well,
there's a lot of great qualities. It's a constant, open, non-judgmental conversation. It's very democratic. Any player in the group brings their own individuality, their own energy, which can influence. It can influence the total result. So there's a great beauty in living in the moment. I think that's what pulls me to it, because I actually function best in situations where there aren't over-contrived constraints on creativity. It's like I work best when you give me a blank page. I like, Kenny Werner has a book called Effortless Mastery, and the whole concept is to be, if you can get into that beautiful, non-judgmental, playful state, then the music can flow through you. Like, before I perform, there's a little prayer I say, and I'm paraphrasing, but I sort of say, hey, can I surrender to the ecstasy and the joy of making the music? Because if I can do that and let myself be an open channel, then I can bring the audience into that world as well and bring them along the journey.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So we're going to get to the end of this COVID-19 lockdown, and we're going to get back to live music at some point. So what do you hope that both the musician and the audience realizes from this time, this absence away from live music?
I know it's teaching me really about to appreciate the beauty of life, the simple things that we overlook. And I would hope that everybody will value the arts and music and just value life in general more and see how precious it is. And I really hope we think about preserving the environment because, it's great. I'm hearing the birds so much more, outside my window. I hope that people think about that and just don't think about getting into business on overdrive.
Yeah, I agree, man. So everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
Oh, that's a good question. Who do I think I am? Sheesh. I think at this advanced stage, I still can't. I feel like that's still evolving. I think that's the eternal search. The best way I can answer that is that the older I get, the more I trust my instincts, and the more I know my instincts, and I trust the reality and accept the reality of what those are. I can tell you, there was some, there was some client of mine. It's a music client. It was just kind of a real drag to deal with. And I thought to myself, God, I don't need though I could use the rest of the money. I was halfway through a project. I thought to myself, well, I just kind of let this situation go because it's not worth the stress. I feel like this experience has taught me to value my time more and say, gee, sir, life is so precious. You don't want to waste it on certain things,
I agree, man. I agree. I think there's a lot of silver linings that can be gleaned from.
I actually feel very positive about my life and humanity, and one of the ways I deal is I have the BBC app in my phone, and it not only gives you a great global perspective on everything that's going on, but they have some really fascinating programs. So I feel like I'm in college.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Yeah, BBC's always been a top-notch outfit to begin with. So yeah, I dig it totally.
Lots of arts programming too.
Yes, without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. They're huge champions of the art. Well, yeah, hey, man, the one thing that I always know is that jazz musicians at the end of the day are the ones that are not into the art for the money. You guys are masters of improv, and if there was ever a moment where there's true improv, it's the world right now. So I have a feeling that this is your natural arena. This is the jazz musician's playground, so to speak. Not that it's ideal. I know how bad it is to have an absence of live music, but at the end of the day, this is a realm of life that's probably, a little bit more familiar to the jazz world. I appreciate you taking some time out, talking about the music and your life in music. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I appreciate you supporting the music, man. Thank you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in New York City, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to John for his time, music, and stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz@youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
And a thousand of thousand, a thousand
Neon Jazz.